Tonight on KQED Newsroom, coronavirus case counts are dropping. New vaccination centers are opening. Does this signal good news for Governor Gavin Newsom's approval ratings? Also, a look at how COVID-19 has ripped through the prison system in one of the state's worst outbreaks. Plus, we talk with KQED's Michael Krasny about his decades as a prominent journalist and his final morning as the host of Forum, which was today. And we take you to the tiny and tony town of Tiburon to meet an iron horse in this week's edition of Something Beautiful. Welcome to KQED Newsroom. I'm Priya David Clemens. Governor Newsom heralded the opening of multiple mass vaccination centers this week as coronavirus case counts rapidly declined. The governor warns we're still in a severe pandemic, but at least we seem to be on an upswing. Meanwhile, whether California schools will reopen at large remains in limbo. Joining us now to discuss all things political in California this week are KQED Senior Editor of Politics and Government, Scott Shafer, and KQED Politics reporter Katie Orr. They join us by Skype from San Francisco and Sacramento. Katie, the governor has promised to share some new steps to getting California schools reopened. So where does that stand?
So the governor is still in negotiations with the legislature over a $6.6 billion reopening plan. Governor Gavin Newsom had said that they might be able to reach a deal as early as today. That has not happened. We haven't heard much more about it. They would phase in learning, in-person learning, starting with the youngest students, so kindergartners through second grade. That's what they're telling us. A sticking point is whether or not teachers and staff who are required to go back to schools get prioritized for vaccinations. Of course, teachers' unions want that to be the case. Other people say, you know, if you take proper safety precautions like masking and social distancing, you don't necessarily need to have everyone vaccinated because, of course, supplies are still really limited.
So, Scott, are the improvements in the coronavirus situation helping to halt the drop in the governor's approval ratings? And what's the latest on the recall effort?
Well, it's really too soon to say that any of this is helping the governor. I mean, people don't get excited when the positivity rate drops to 4%. They'll get excited when they have a vaccine, when they can see their parents and their grandparents, when their kids are in school, and all those things that are, part of normal life. I think people just have pandemic fatigue, and they're not happy with the way the governor has handled this. He's hit the road this week. He was in San Francisco today, and he was in Fresno earlier in the week, Oakland, San Diego. And I think he's trying to bring, some Democrats with him who are literally behind him cheering to kind of, just give really to buck him up because he's been taking it from all sides. The recall is getting close to the number of signatures it needs to get on the ballot. And so I think it's pretty clear that he is going to be facing that recall probably later in the year, like October, November. I think for him, he needs to get vaccines in as many arms as he can to make people feel better about him.
So, Katie, switching gears, there seems to be this alarming rise in hate crimes against Asian Americans. How are politicians looking at tackling that?
Right. So the API Legislative Caucus in Sacramento came out today with a pretty impassioned news conference saying that they're angry. They're not going to sit by and be the quote unquote model minority anymore. They're going to speak out against these acts of violence, which we have been seeing throughout California and in the Bay, including the Bay Area. And they really seem to have been targeting elderly Asian Americans as well, which is even more concerning. This is highlighted today by the Lunar New Year. At this press conference, legislators were saying this should be a day that we're celebrating. Instead, we're here asking for help. They are talking about putting forward a number of bills in the coming week to try and address this issue from the legislative standpoint.
Definitely troubling. Scott, there was a new poll out which shows Senator Dianne Feinstein's approval rating at a historical low. What does that say to you?
Well, Dianne Feinstein's been in the Senate for 29 years, and for most of those years, she's had a fairly positive, quite positive approval rating. But in recent years, people, Democrats in particular, have sort of fallen out of love with her politics. She's maybe too bipartisan than this particular era calls for. The hearings, the recent confirmation hearings for Supreme Court justices, there were questions about how well she handled that. The last one with Amy Coney Barrett ended with her hugging Lindsey Graham, who was just the devil to a lot of Democrats. So I think you're just seeing, voters looking, at some of the reports of her cognitive decline, seeing it for themselves, and feeling like, maybe it's time for someone new. She is 87 years old. She's the oldest member of the U.S. Senate. And, I think some people may feel it was a mistake for her to run for re-election. Her term goes through 2024. That's a long time to be in the Senate.
And do you think she'll serve that out?
Well, it remains to be seen. I mean, I think a lot of people assumed that she would not do that she would step down at some point and give Governor Newsom an appointment to replace her. And this could become an issue in the recall, actually, because if Newsom were recalled and, say, replaced by Kevin Faulconer, the Republican former mayor of San Diego, he's not going to appoint, most likely, a Democrat to take her place. And so that issue could play out. It could become an issue. He has refused to say at this point what kind of a person he would appoint. But I think Democrats will be looking at that very carefully.
Okay, Katie, catch us up on what California's representatives in Washington, D.C. have been doing as the Senate impeachment trial of President Trump began this week.
Right. California has two representatives on the team trying the impeachment of former President Donald Trump, Representative Eric Swalwell and Representative Ted Lieu. Representative Lieu actually made a compelling argument for why senators should vote to convict President Donald Trump. He says if they don't, and he can run again for president in the next 4 years, Lieu is actually concerned about what would happen if President Trump ran and lost. He is worried that we would see an insurrection similar to what we saw on January 6th.
All right, very interesting. Katie Orr and Scott Shafer, both with KQED. Thanks for your time and your insights.
Thank you.
It's been a year since the coronavirus began its deadly march across California. While the virus has felled people from all demographics, among the hardest hit are those who live in group settings, like nursing homes and prisons. Reporter Monica Lam takes a look at how COVID-19 has impacted people in state prisons.
As the coronavirus sweeps across California, it has been tearing through the prisons like wildfire.
Most of my friends caught COVID. And I know a few people that also passed. There was kind of like really no kind of standard as far as like mask use or hand sanitizer.
Confined in close and often crowded quarters, nearly half of everyone incarcerated around the state became infected. That's nearly 50,000 people. Adamu Chan was inside California's oldest prison, San Quentin, at the height of the worst outbreak last summer.
The architecture of San Quentin is not suitable for social distancing, right? Folks are in 4x9 cells, double bunk. So there's two people in a very small cell. And in a cell block, there's about 800 people sharing the same air.
Well, they couldn't have done anything worse than what they did, because the whole prison at San Quentin, virtually 2/3 of the prison got infected, and it traveled through the prison system at the speed of light.
Dawn Spector is the executive director of the Prison Law Office and has been suing the state for years over the treatment of incarcerated people. He points to a report released this month by the Office of the Inspector General slamming prison officials for causing a public health disaster.
People who are incarcerated and the staff who work there are at increased risk of getting the virus because they can't escape from it. And essentially, prisons are incubators of the virus because it just spreads from one place to another really quickly.
The Inspector General wrote, the prison failed to take actions that could have mitigated the resulting widespread outbreak. Testing for the virus was inadequate. Sick or potentially infected people were not immediately quarantined, and thorough contact tracing was not conducted.
Our clients want CDCR held to account for managing this so poorly, or not managing at all.
Marin County Public Defender Christine O'Hanlon is suing CDCR, the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. She represents 249 clients inside San Quentin who say conditions there amount to cruel and unusual punishment, a violation of the Eighth Amendment.
Our position is that CDCR should not get a pass for the egregious conduct. I think they need to be held to answer to what they were doing, why they allowed this to go on, and they need to be discouraged and deterred from doing this in the future.
Here at San Quentin State Prison, 28 people have died from COVID-19. That is the largest number of deaths at any of the state's prisons. In October, a state appellate court ordered the prison to cut its population in half so that those who are inside can properly social distance and quarantine if necessary. The governor and prison system are appealing that order, saying it's a very complicated decision who to release. Advocates do have cause to celebrate. Incarcerated people are now part of the vaccination priority group. Thousands of prisoners have already received shots.
And it's true that these people committed crimes, so some people feel like they shouldn't be prioritized. But not only is it the humane thing to do, but it's also in the public's interest because the staff can catch it from the people. Thousands of people are released from prison every month that go out into the community.
CDCR declined my request for an interview. Instead, they gave me this statement. The department has made many improvements and already remedied several of the citations to keep all those who live and work in our state prisons safe. Adamu Chan says the vaccine is vital, but it isn't enough.
Prisons don't provide proper health care to folks. Prisons are filled with large populations of elderly folks and people with pre-existing conditions, and they're dirty and unsafe.
For KQED Newsroom, I'm Monica Lam.
Our next guest tonight is a towering Bay Area icon, beloved by many here at KQED and across California. He joins us after his last morning of hosting Forum, KQED's flagship radio talk show. Before we get to the man of the hour, a bit of background. Michael Krasny grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, the son of a factory worker father and a mother who didn't graduate from high school. Michael's first and abiding love is literature. Journalism is his second calling. When writing his own novels didn't pan out, he began interviewing authors and other public figures, using his wellspring of literary knowledge as a foundation for his discussions. Michael came to California in 1970 as a professor at San Francisco State University. He began working for KQED 28 years ago, almost to the day. Over the years, he has interviewed literally thousands of people on his morning call-in talk show. They run the gamut from authors and filmmakers to scientists, innovators, and politicians. Along the way, he has earned the love and respect of his colleagues and listeners. He has been inducted into the Radio Hall of Fame, and in his honor, San Francisco declared today Michael Krasny Day, a feat in itself, and as it turns out, the fourth time he's been given his own day in this city by the Bay. We now welcome to the show the longtime host of KQED's Forum, Michael Krasny, joining us now by Skype from Marin County. Michael, thanks for joining us on the show.
Thank you for having me.
So this is your last day hosting Forum. How are you doing?
I'm okay. It's a bit of an emotional roller coaster, but it's been extremely gratifying hearing from so many people, voices and people, those I work with, students of mine, friends, relatives, neighbors. It's been a bit overwhelming. It's been what I described as a tsunami. Mm-hmm. And that's what happens, I guess, when you step off a stage after this many years.
Well, not for everyone, but you are certainly so well respected and, as I mentioned, loved. The callers who were speaking to you this morning, several of them were literally in tears, and several of the high-profile guests who were on talked about how you've held up this sort of standard for Bay Area intellectual discourse over the years. Are you happy with what you are leaving behind? Do you feel like you've left a legacy there?
I always think the word legacy is a bit weighty and onerous, but I think that certainly the years that I've been toiling on the radio, and it is sometimes labor, it can be very intense. And as you know, especially when you're dealing with breaking news and those sorts of things, it can put a great deal of strain even. And doing it day after day can be kind of grueling. But for the most part, I think we've made a great, and I say we because there really is a team. I'm the one who's out in front, and I'm the one who gets both the praise and the brickbats and the love and sometimes the enmity. But the reality is that I think we've done an extraordinarily exceptional job in bringing what I like to think of as high-level discourse. It's always what I've been behind, high-level journalism to the Bay Area, and things that are both not only intellectually but emotionally challenging and that really make people think. I hope make them good citizens, make them try to reach for higher bars in their own lives, and also, above all, make them informed. And make them informed in I like to think of a multidimensional way, a multivalent way, which touches on many, many bases.
You didn't come up as an intellectual. You came up in a more rough and tumble way. How did you transition from where you were to where you are?
It was just a conscious decision. I think some of the guys I ran with were pretty wild, and they were certainly unpredictable, and sometimes it was fascinating. And I can speak sometimes as if, I lived some kind of Dickensian youth, but it's true that I was one of these sort of sensitive young men who liked reading poetry, but I had to do it kind of on the sly. Most of the guys in my working class neighborhood liked to look under the hoods of cars and spend their time with sports, which were very important to me as well, but certainly I developed a love for literature early on and for the life of the mind. And once I went off to college, there was a conscious decision that, well, maybe I don't have to be the bad boy I was, or don't have to speak out in ways that, frankly, were trying to get attention, that there were better ways to gear my energies. And also helped, by the way, in terms of what I like to think of as the beginning of a would-be romantic life and making friendships and liking being identified with, I suppose, well, the more intelligent and the better acting kind of kids. But I do certainly value the time I spent, shall we say, transgressive in many respects.
Well, it seems like there were some transgressions against you as well. You write about a teacher who dunked your head in a toilet at one point, something that certainly is not going to fly today. And you talked about being in fist fights through high school. I'm curious about the transition that you've made. You've noted several times that the author Saul Bellow inspired you to ask, what does it mean to live a good life and to be a good person? Has doing good come naturally to you, or has that been a bit of a struggle?
I don't know if it's a struggle, but I certainly like to think of kindness and concern and respect for other people as a form of goodness, as a virtue, as much as one can practice that. I like to describe myself, even at this stage of life, as still a work in progress, however, because every day can be a challenge. Somebody can cut you off when you're driving, or people can be impolite, rude, disrespectful, and so forth. And sometimes it requires rolling with the punches. And that's always a challenge, I think, not only for me, but for anybody who wants to live a good life and who wants to be a decent person.
Let's go to a question that you've been asked many times. It's one of the hardest questions I know to answer, but I've got to ask it. Do you have a favorite interviewee?
And the answer is always the same, no, because I've done so many. And I don't say that to be evasive. Certainly there are wonderful memories of extraordinary people that I've interviewed. And I'm not only talking about famous people and people who are leaders in almost every field you can think of. I'm also talking about everyday people, ordinary people who are doing amazing things. And we think now, because of the pandemic, particularly of those in the front lines and those who risked their lives before the vaccine and who continue to risk their lives. I'm also talking about hospice workers, and I'm talking about people who, journalists who are out there, Doctors Without Borders, journalists who have to tell stories and want to tell stories and put their lives at risk. Those are very meaningful interviews for me in the pantheon of my interviews. But of course, there are favorite interviews that I continue to cherish, and they are just such a range that it's very difficult to me. I get this question often at dinner parties, who was your favorite, who was the best, who was the most difficult, and so forth. It's always challenging because there have been, frankly, so many in so many different fields. I don't, like I say, mean to evade it, but it's a tough question to answer.
You've had many peaks and valleys through your time as a journalist. Is there a peak experience that you could tell us about?
Well, there are some things that come to mind. I mentioned at the Commonwealth Club event, for example, interviewing Ram Dass after he had had a stroke, and he said he wanted to be on, despite having gone through the stroke, to talk about the effect it had on him.
And Ram Dass, the author of Be Here Now, Spiritual Leader.
Yes, thank you. Said like a good journalist, aware of your audience. And it was moving. It was actually reduced me to tears. So there are moments like that. There was a moment when I asked Joyce Carol Oates, who was good enough to write a foreword to one of my books, about her agent, who was living in, Billy Abraham, who was living in Palo Alto, and then died right before we were on the air. And I said, do you want to say something about Billy? And she just broke down. She couldn't even speak. And, you know, one of the cardinal rules about broadcasting is no dead air under any circumstances. So that moment stands out. Moments stand out like the one with Betty Friedan when I asked her a question that she didn't like and she got up and started to leave. Moments stand out like the one with Billy D. Williams, famous African-American actor from Star Wars, but also many other important roles that he played. And I was interviewing him and I found it very challenging. It was like pulling teeth. You know, you get these interviews sometimes when people are like that. And I just took a chance and I said to him, I feel like there's something weighing on you. And he said, well, my mother just died yesterday. And I thought, my goodness, you're going through grief, you know? And so the interview took a whole different turn. Instead of talking about Black Expo and about his film career, I said, tell me about your mother. You know, it's one of the things one has to do, I suppose, in live radio when you're not edited and you have no net. And that was one of those moments. And he spoke really very movingly and poignantly about his mother. So those kind of moments come to mind. Malcolm Gladwell says, you know, when you're asked a question, the first things that come to your mind are sometimes the most significant. I'm not sure I necessarily agree. I like to ruminate and sort of reflect and think about these things to a greater degree. But those moments certainly come to mind. And moments of, just heard from one of my former producers, David Minko, who lives in Canada now. And he told me about a time when I got tangled up in my headphones. And he said some really lovely things about working professionally with me. But he also said there was such a hilarious moment for us. And at the time, he was once asked, what's the most memorable moment? And he said, that was the most memorable moment because I saw a side of Michael that I never saw before that. And probably not many people do see from that point forward.
Now that you're coming out of this energetic world of journalism, what's next?
Well, I have a book to finish that I hope is seeing the end of the light of the tunnel. It's a book on the subject of honor, which is something I got interested in when I was an aspiring Shakespeare scholar, as a scholar, and then started thinking about honor. What does honor mean? And especially when we think of so much bad things identified, like honor killings and honor among thieves and honor in, the Ku Klux Klan has honor. So there's toxic honor, there's honor of dishonorable nature, to be sure, and there's also honor in sports and honor in the military. And I just really went off on a tear on this, and that's a book I want to finish. I want to do some more writing, and I may even go back to writing like I did many, many years ago when I wrote a regular column for the San Francisco Examiner. And I've got a grandchild now, first grandchild, and I'm eager to spend time with her. I got my second shot yesterday, so I'm going to be ready. Have shots will travel, and hope to do a good deal of traveling as well. And certainly stay in the broadcast world. I'm not sure what that means, looking into podcasts and looking into other possibilities, possibly even with other radio stations, but there's so much out there now. If you're going to be a serious journalist, as you know, as anybody who's been at this for any length of time knows, Larry King just died, and I used to joke about Larry King, who would say, so tell me about this book. And he would take a pride in, I never read the book, but I follow my own curiosity, and that's all I follow. Because I don't want to sound like a know-it-all. I don't want to be all educated and everything. I've gone to the other extreme, not to sound like a know-it-all, but certainly to be as well-versed and as well-prepared as I possibly can be for any program I do. And that includes not reading all books, as some people presume and have assumed that I do, but certainly reading enough or a lot of any author's book who I have on the show. And great part is a courtesy to that author, too.
Michael, you really wanted to be an author for a long time, and that didn't work out for you, but you have written several books, and as you said, you've got another one coming. One of the books that you wrote was a book of Jewish humor, and I would love for you to share with us a joke as we say goodbye to you here.
I was recently teaching a story by a Nobel Prize laureate writer, actually a Yiddish writer named Isaac Bashevis Singer, who not only won the Nobel Prize, but also won a couple of National Book Awards. And I was trying to tell my students of how a lot of Jewish humor is based in a different kind of cadence and rhythm. So, for example, you had Henny Youngman, the king of the one-liners, who said, try to get to that chigaboom type of cadence. I went to the doctor said, you're sick. He said, I'm going to get another opinion. Okay, you're ugly. Or, you fast forward to someone like Rodney Dangerfield, the original Schlemiel, I get no respect. I saw this woman, she said, come to my house tonight, nobody will be there. I went, nobody was there. And I think about something Isaac Bashevis Singer said to me in a very serious interview I did with him on stage at the Herbst Theater. And I said, Mr. Singer, do you believe in free will? And with that same kind of great Yiddish cadence and rhythm, he said, I have no choice. So there's a lot of philosophy embedded in that, and it can perhaps convey a great deal of wisdom, I hope, as well as humor. So thank you for asking for humor to end this interview. One should end, as best as possible, all interviews on a note of humor.
Well, thank you for sharing your time and your insight and your life with KQED and with all of us here. Michael Krasny, KQED's forum host, retiring after 28 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Priya.
Tonight's Something Beautiful was suggested by Michael Krasny, who told us that one of his favorite places is Blackie's Pasture in Tiburon, a serene field featuring a statue of a much-loved real-life horse that once lived there. We dedicate this week's look at Something Beautiful to our extraordinary colleague, Michael Krasny. Happy trails, Michael. I'm Priya David Clemens. You can reach me on Twitter at Priya D. Clemens. And you can find more of our news coverage at kqed.org/newsroom. From all of us here at KQED Newsroom, thank you for joining us. We're off next week, so we'll see you back here on Friday, February 26th. Happy Lunar New Year, and good night.